Good afternoon. Yvonne Stewart here with you in our study of Luke's Gospel. Now today we are going to be looking at chapter 23, digging out the treasures in Jesus's final moments on the earth. If you haven't read it yet, hit pause real quick and just read through all of chapter 23 so that you have a good idea of the context for what we're talking about today. And then hit play again as we study Luke's Gospel, chapter 23, verses 1 to 56. Innocent. Jesus was innocent. He knew it. God knew it. His disciples knew it. And most surprisingly of all, the vicious, violent, hated Roman officials knew it. What do you know about Jesus? Do you believe that he was completely innocent when he died for you? Imagine the discipline and faithfulness needed to live an entire life perfectly. Most of us have enough of a challenge trying to get through even one day or 1 hour without so much as an errant thought. Achieving a sinless life in order to qualify as a faultless sacrifice took daily sacrifice, even moment by moment sacrifice of selfishness and personal desires. And that's exactly what Jesus did. Having done that, imagine then spending your final hours being lied about, mocked, and tortured. Just imagine the very people you came to save so thoroughly rejecting you that they boldly demanded your death and were willing to say anything against you to ensure it happened, even if it was a lie. That's exactly what happened to Jesus. When we are in the glorious season of remembering and celebrating the arrival of Jesus' birth into our human condition like we do at Christmas time, we do well to meditate on the reason why he came and what he would eventually go through to fulfill the purpose of his coming. Have you been asking Jesus any questions that he refuses to answer? Pilate and Herod know how you feel. Sometimes it seems like Jesus is refusing to answer us, but Jesus promised to his sheep that we would hear his voice and know his voice and follow him. Mockers, on the other hand, get a different side of Jesus, as verse 9 shows. He has nothing to prove, seeking for or hoping for God's presence because we want to see fireworks and spectacular things that we've only heard about from others. Well, that's not exactly likely to work out for them. Jesus wasn't going to participate in this mockery of a trial, at least not in the sense of giving them a sideshow. He could have called for legions of angels to come and rescue him, and what an extraordinary miracle that would have been. But that was not his purpose. Jesus was at that trial so that he could fulfill Scripture and get to the cross. He did not need to go out with a bang just to satisfy their curiosity. One day while Jesus was teaching his disciples, he brought up the cross. Of course, they all knew what the cross meant. They regularly saw men hanging on crosses all along the sides of the road, which the Romans would do to warn people and try to keep their subjects in line. Seeing a cross was horrifyingly normal. Usually, the convicted criminals had to carry their own cross to the place of crucifixion. However, in Pilate's attempt to release Jesus, he ended up being tortured and scourged more than most. Certainly, no other person crucified had a deadly crown of thorns pushed into his head. Jesus was probably carrying his cross to the best of his weakened ability, but constantly stumbling. And so a man was grabbed and forced to carry the cross of Jesus. Imagine the privilege. Oh, I'm sure Simon of Cyrene did not consider it a privilege at the time, but it was. To be remembered for all time as the man who helped Jesus in this way in his deepest need. Incredible. There wasn't a kinder thing a person could do short of taking Jesus' place altogether, which the man could definitely not do. There is something that we can do for Jesus. He taught, if any of you wants to be my follower, you must give up your own way, take up your cross, and follow me. We can't take up the cross of Jesus, but we can take up our own cross and follow him. Do you do that? As you can well imagine, those who loved Jesus and believed in him were heartbroken. Yet Jesus, who has been days without sleep, beaten, had a crown of thorns thrust into his head, and so weak he needed another person to carry his cross, stops to utter a prophetic word in verse 31. If these things are done when the tree is green, what will happen when it is dry? In other words, look at what they're doing to me, the green tree. It will be much worse for you. Jesus is the green tree, and similar persecutions will happen to his disciples. This is actually only the beginning of sorrows for Jesus' followers. In coming years, these same religious leaders and these same Romans will persecute the new Christians in horrific ways. The end of Jesus will be victorious, and so will be his followers. But in the meantime, they will pay a heavy price for paving the way for the gospel to go out into all the world. When I think of how I feel when I'm in pain, even if I've just hit my funny bone or have a headache, it takes over. In the midst of pain, I'm only thinking about how much it hurts and how can I get it to stop. I'm hardly thinking about having a conversation with someone or how I can help them. But Jesus, there was only one reason he was in pain, in the pain that he was going through, and that was for that criminal hanging on the cross next to him. And that criminal suddenly struck up a conversation with him in verse 39. The pain of Jesus had an exquisite, eternal purpose. A man deserving of the punishment that Jesus was going through, one who was indeed sharing it, was that purpose. Jesus could ignore the insults and the mockery. He could endure the excruciating torture, but he could never turn away from a repentant heart or a declaration of belief. For that reason, Jesus came. The devil had been tempting and trying Jesus at various times throughout his earthly life and ministry. He looked for opportunities to kill him or to disrupt the Son of God from his mission. When would there ever be a more opportune time to give into the temptation than when you are at your weakest and most vulnerable? The tempter was using a myriad of voices in a last-ditch effort to force Jesus what might be considered only natural. Save yourself. Well, Jesus had salvation on his mind, but contrary to what it looked like, he didn't need saving. We did. And Jesus did what we all do when we need to remind ourselves why we do the things we do for the benefit of others. It wasn't that he needed to prove himself king of the Jews. Jesus spoke his motivation out loud for all to hear, in the most shocking and reverberating prayer of all of history. Father, forgive them, for they don't know what they are doing. It wasn't only the life of Jesus that was filled with miracles, but his death also. People have been shouting out for Jesus to prove that he was God's son. And God did it for him with an astounding thing that happened in relation to his death. One of the most important miracles was the divine tearing of the curtain in the temple in verse 45. This curtain kept ordinary people out of the holiest place. This was a place where God's presence lived and physically rested. When God accepted the sacrifice of his son Jesus, his work was finished and he breathed his last. Access to the Father became immediately available to every person who would believe on the Son for salvation. Anyone may boldly approach the throne of our gracious God through faith in Jesus. The Father has been revealed. He is no longer hidden, no longer accessible only to a few. Have you worshiped God and received the gift of himself that he offered? I love how God always saves himself a remnant. There couldn't have been many who would have both cared enough about the body of Jesus and had the position and the resources to intervene on behalf of him. It is truly a difficult thing to go against your entire religious sect. Another religious leader was drawn to Jesus and sought to meet with him in the dark of night. Taking up the cause of a man, the rest of his notable peers had just crucified, and still in the light of fading day, well, that was bold indeed. Joseph couldn't know or couldn't yet bring himself to believe that Jesus would only be using or borrowing his tomb for a few days. But he took great care and expense to honorably prepare Jesus' body. It occurs to me that the placement of Jesus' body in death was much more honorable than where he was placed at his birth. It's good to think whether we've given him the place of highest honor in our heart. Well, that's all for today. I hope you receive some revelation from God about the events surrounding the death of Jesus. The scriptures I read or referred to in today's message are written in the description of this video. Make sure you check those out for your own study and dig out the treasures that God has hidden for you to find. In the meantime, I'll be praying for you, and I hope that you will join me again on Monday at 12 Central Time. Have a blessed week.